Hazur, there are two questions. What part women play in Islamic society? And second question is, what is the punishment for murder or adultery in Islam?
You see, the women play the same role as men play, good or bad. It all depends on themselves. If women decide to play a positive, constructive role in Islam, there is no barrier, there is no hindrance created by Islam in their way. They are in fact encouraged to follow and pursue that path of goodness to the very maximum of their limits. In short, that is the answer. But if she has some difficulty, unless she specifies that difficulty to understand the role of women, I can't answer her. But in generality, I assure you and others through her that the role of women in Islam can be as constructive as that of men or as destructive as that of men. Right? The second part, please.
The second question is, what is the punishment for murder or adultery in Islam?
There are two different punishments. Adultery is punishable in Islam by 100 lashes, not by condemnation to death, as most of the mainstream Muslims believe wrongly without justification. But having said that, I should further explain the atmosphere in which such a punishment works, where the society has been reformed, where dedication to truth becomes a common practice, where far more often husbands are true to their wives and wives are true to their husbands. Then for a person to rob them of their peace by effecting illicit relationship with one of the partners, this is a big crime against society. And Islam very powerfully depresses it, suppresses it, and intends to uproot it. That is one side of this rather severe punishment. The other side of this punishment, which is seldom brought to light, is that the proof of adultery is made so hard in Islam that it becomes extremely difficult for anyone to prove the crime of adultery in relation to any single or person or a couple. Because 4 witnesses are needed. 4 witnesses who can swear to God that they saw such and such and such and such locked in a compromising position where they saw with their own eyes what happened. Now, where can you find 4 witnesses in a society where this punishment is an integral part of their jurisprudence? In free, promiscuous societies, of course, anybody can find 4 or even hundreds of witnesses, or millions in case of acts of adultery on television, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm talking of a society where the attitudes of society have been reformed, where the peace of homes has been established, where a threat, occasional threat, is created to destroy that peace. Once accepted, this will go on destroying the peace of the whole society. There can be no stoppage. Because this powerful gravitation to these satiations, if not dealt with firmly and sternly, would not be able to be stopped later on. That is why the apparent punishment is so severe, but it is seldom realized, so that only very occasionally some exemplary cases appear to deliver the message of warning to the whole society at the cost of one or two criminals and their pain. If the peace and satisfaction, trust in family, mutual trust in the relationship of husband and wife is achieved, I do not think it's a heavy price to pay. If you remove such punishments, then gradually the society will be carried away by sensual pursuits which find no end once permitted. The journey is always downhill tasks, downhill journeys. Like imagine what the European society or British society was around 200, 300 years before. The homes were much safer. Homes offered peace, and they became the focal points of peace and satisfaction and social pleasures drawn from not only from husband and wife relationship, but from mother and daughter relationship, son and mother and father and daughter, etc., etc. Sister and brother relationship also played a role. So that was a secure unit which the family concept always intended to create. But once licenses were given in the name of individual freedom, then what it came to, this noble society, is quite apparent. Now the questions are asked, how can you stop the ultimate wreckage of the entire family system in our country? You have to return to the point where you started this journey away from morality, and without returning to the same point, you cannot achieve any security, any measure of security for your families. So in answer to this question of the lady, I assure her that the punishment in Islam appears to be severe, but it is not prejudicial to either to one male sex or to the female sex. It is equally applied to both and is intended to stem the crime in the offing, so that the society is rid of this trend. Unfortunately, when you look from your own point of view and your own freedom, you will seldom approve of strict laws. But when you are on the receiving end, when a member of your own family is unfortunately misled away from the family relationship and bondage and trust by any vagabond who happens to impress a girl in the family in his artificial posture adopted during dancing clubs, etc., the suffering which such a girl leaves behind in the family, if you look from that vantage point, then you realize why such severe punishment is meted out. And the suffering which is the lot of such a girl in the end, that has also to be realized. Many often these girls are wasted because they are abandoned by those ex-devotees, and after their passion is over, they are discarded as like a used rotten cloth. But there is no future left for them anyway. Then even when they go into marriage, their previous habits continue to tell heavily upon their married piece of married life. So a lot can be said about it, but the question only required a short answer. I had to prolong the answer because I knew if I answered in yes or no, the questioner could not be satisfied. Far more can be said, but I bring this answer to a close because I think I have left enough pointers which, when followed, one can satisfy oneself as to the wisdom of Islamic teachings in this regard.
Punishment of murder.
The punishment of murder. That is a different issue, as I said. The punishment of murder is also death, because like crime must be repaid in the like terms. This is the basic principle. But a murderer can be forgiven. Not only that his sentence is reduced or changed from death to imprisonment, but a murderer can even be forgiven in Islam, but not by the state, but by the rightful, how would you describe a wali in English?
Custodian.
Guardian is a different word. But, no, what I mean to say, for instance, a wife is murdered, then the husband is the one who suffers chiefly. If a daughter is murdered, then the father is the one who suffers chiefly. If in the absence of the two, a girl is murdered with a brother, then it is the brother who actually is the main victim of crime. Because the dead disappears, and who is left behind to suffer is the nearest of kin. So next of kin perhaps is the right translation. So the right lies with the next of kin to the murdered person. He can decide if, for instance, he is compensated in some ways by the murderer. Now one can say it is a very undignified way, but it is not at all. Ransoms are traditional in human affairs of war and peace, and blood money is not just a religious practice. It is a human practice all over the world, throughout the human history. So if blood money is paid, and the person who is next of kin to the murdered decides that it will not resolve any problem for him if he is killed, but it may resolve problems for the deceased children if the deceased is married, or other relatives. And the murderer, according to his view, did it, for instance, accidentally, or he actually has begun to repent. All these issues are for him to decide, not for the state. State is only the custodian of justice. For the state, it is to decide whether someone has actually murdered someone else or not. The state has no right to forgive, despite the fact that the injured party is different. So, Islamic injunction in this regard is very profound and very wide. So that is why capital punishment, although most often carried in Islam, it has a window opening in an avenue of exceptions, whereby the death penalty does not become the only penalty meted out to a criminal. But the right, as I have said, belongs to the people and also to the relatives, but also there must not be any coercion whatsoever. No threat must be involved. For example, at the time of Hazrat Ali Raziyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, one murderer sought forgiveness from the relatives of the deceased or the murdered person in a way that they couldn't refuse. Also, handsome blood money was agreed upon. So these two factors put together made the deceased party, the aggrieved party, to decide in favor of letting the murderer off the hook. When this case was brought to the notice of the Khalifa of that time, Hazrat Ali, for his final approval, he inquired about the details of the case, and he discovered, to his deep concern, that the murdered party was a Jewish party, and the relatives of the murdered were a small minority in a Muslim state. So he was afraid that perhaps a pressure was brought about upon these people. So he sought an interview with the aggrieved party separately, and personally satisfied himself that no pressure, no threat, no coercion was ever brought about to play an influence, to play a role in making them decide in favor of the murderer. When he got satisfied, then he permitted this to happen. So Islamic system of Islamic penal code is based on deep human psychic factors. And as such, if you analyze all the Islamic penal code, as I am giving an illustration to you, I'm sure you'll be satisfied that it is the best available penal code in the entire world. Thank you.